Serious. What's the scariest experience you have been through? The first time I had a gallbladder attack, I legit thought I was dying. The pain is completely out of this world. It's hard to really describe, the pain is unfathomable and feels incredibly dangerous, especially when you have no idea what is happening and the panic that goes with it. I thought I was having a heart attack, or worse, that my body was straight up dying. It sounds like hyperbole, but it honestly isn't. Worst experience of my entire life. School shooting. I was a junior in high school, and a recent transfer student who got expelled at another school started shooting in the commons. Everyone hangs out in the commons before school, so it was super crowded and dangerous. I remember hearing the first shot and thought a table collapsed. No one even batted an eye. My orchestra teacher came out of his office and was immediately suspicious and said, "You guys, what was that?" Then a few seconds later, the second bang. We knew then what was happening. I happened to be in the orchestra room right next to the commons, and we had an exit that lead to the parking lot. But in school they teach you whenever there's an emergency to hide in a corner. I remember trying to hide in a practice room, but it was locked. Then my friends and I ducked under a piano and students starting swarming in the room from the commons. At that point our orchestra teacher said, "Go and hit us, run out the exit instead." It was a brave decision he made, and running to our cars was the longest run of my life. I remember ducking as I ran because I thought there might be other shooters aiming for us runners. As I ran I realized I didn't even have my car keys or phone and didn't know where to go. Luckily we made it to the back of the parking lot and met up with a few friends and crammed 6 of us in a 4-seater. I'll never forget the faces of my peers around me scarred with fear. And I'll never forget legitimately thinking I might die that day. After aimlessly driving and making phone calls to our parents with one phone, we were able to watch the news and saw that there was no one injured. It turns out our government teacher bravely tackled the shooter to the ground. He was known throughout the state and even threw a pitch for the Mariners game. I'm very grateful it didn't end how most shootings do. Finding my dad dead after he killed himself. His room had never been so quiet and still. I stepped in and saw him face down, blue, with his urine all over the floor where he'd peed himself after he passed. I was in complete shock, and I'll never forget touching him to try to wake him up and the feeling of recognition finally setting in. Even though I'd known as soon as I stepped in the room that he was dead, my mind refused to let me accept it was true until I felt him and tried to shake him awake. Feeling his stillness was the most terrifying moment of my life, and I don't remember much after that. It clicks in your head that this person is gone. They are never coming back. And then the guilt and pain come rushing in. The days leading up to his suicide were filled with fear and anxiety because I knew deep down that it was coming one day and there was nothing I could do to stop it. That feeling of hopelessness is hard to put into words. Second scariest experience of my life was the time my dad tried to kill himself by stabbing himself in the head, overdosing, and tying a gun to his hand before firing twice. SWAT ended up coming to stop him, and the bullets shot out the window and missed by centimeters. I'll never forget falling to my knees outside and covering my ears because I was terrified of hearing him die. I heard the gunshots anyway and thought he was dead. I ended up having to clean up all of the blood left behind. I was terrified of him being mad at me for putting him in a psychiatric hospital. At that point, he'd made comments about killing all of us and then himself a few months prior, so that night I genuinely thought I was going to die. When I was 10 years old, I was abducted while my family and I were camping at a state lake. My parents had to run some errands, so all us kids were left with one of our aunts. I went to a creek next to where our camper was to go fishing, probably about 75 yards or so. I had forgot my bait and didn't want to go back for it. Unlucky for me, a man was there, so I asked him for some worms. Said they were in his car just around the corner. He guided me there, and that's when it happened. I was gagged and taken to a different part of the park grounds. What happened next, as one could imagine, are the things my nightmares were made of for countless years to come. I'm 33 now and still recall with vivid details the things that were done. Thankfully I was found within about 2 hours of my abduction. Unlucky for him, it was my father who found us first. The man somehow managed to escape my father's wrath and flee. He was apprehended by state troopers and local paid about 30 minutes later. Few all the legal shenanigans and sentencing, dude was a repeat offender and still only received like 12 years prison. My family kept tabs on him while he was in custody and were notified of his release. The second scariest thing was the day he was released. My heart dropped. He's long been a fragment of past, and I learned to not live in fear over that any longer. When I was 14, I had gone camping with the Boy Scouts and we met another troop and decided to play a game of capture the flag. Since it was the night before we were leaving and the other troop showed up at 9 p.m, our scoutmaster said we couldn't play. About 15 minutes later we were heading to the bathroom in pairs and we run into a group of them. My bathroom buddy ducks out as one of the guys from the other troop puts an arm around my neck and drags me out into a field. I kept trying to explain that we weren't playing and that there was a misunderstanding, and then the punches started flying. I had been training in martial arts since I was 8 and it's nothing like the fucking movies. I was trying to throw off a blow from one guy while 5 others were throwing punches and kicks at me. I may have landed 2 or 3 hits to 1 or 2 faces before I was knocked down, and then all I could do was curl into a ball as they all kicked me. After what felt like a lifetime, but was more than likely only a few seconds of getting kicked, they ran off. One dipshit chose to run back and kick me one last time, and I bear hugged his leg as he made contact, and I'm pretty sure I punched him in his crotch as hard as I could. I felt something give. I pray it was a testicle, and I got clocked in the head as I heard weird groan. I can't be sure that wasn't me though. After a few minutes I was able to collect myself enough to get up and make it back to my group, where I detailed what happened. As we're getting worked up about this, the other troop shows up and starts asking what's wrong. I recognize a few faces and point them out, and one dude was limping hard, so I pointed him out too. They all denied it, though, so nothing came of it. Sunday morning after breakfast before we were leaving we sat in a circle and had to say what we were thankful for. I got in trouble for saying I was thankful for being alive. I never went to another Boy Scout meeting after that. I was dating this guy for about 2 months. It was just another Friday night. I ordered a pizza and went in his bedroom to watch TV while I waited for it. He was on his laptop in the dining area. He started acting odd. He kept saying that he wanted to cage fight my ex-husband whom he'd never met. I remember getting and paying for the pizza. Then he asks me, "What did you do that for?" I had no idea what he was talking about. He proceeds to attack me. He pins me to the ground and is choking me. Well, I was sure he was going to kill me. I managed to reach up in between his legs and grab and twist his balls as hard as I could. He rolled me over and bit my shoulder, then let me go. I still have the scar. I ran to his bedroom looking for my phone. I was in a panic and didn't realize I could call 911 with his phone. This was back before most phones had screen locks. I made the mistake of telling him I was calling 911 but hadn't found my phone yet. He struggled with me, then stopped and went into his closet. I managed to find my phone at this point but didn't get the chance to call. He came out with a gun, my ex-husband's gun that he had stolen from my house. He struggled with me on his bed. I thought for sure I was dead. He abruptly gets up again and stands at the foot of the bed. 1 second he's standing there, the next he's gone. Apparently, I totally blacked out the part where he shot himself in the head. I finally managed to call 911, but I didn't know his address. The cops finally showed up, but he was dead by then. He was a bodybuilder. Turns out he bought illegal steroids off the internet. The presumption was he either took too many or had a bad reaction that caused him to flip out. I haven't thought about that whole incident for a long time. This happened 14 years ago, and retelling it has had an effect I didn't know was still there. My mother tried to kill me. I was 17 and am currently no contact with her. I was kicked out at 14 and we have had a really unstable relationship since I was about 10. We were arguing over food and she was already mad about her boyfriend going on holiday with his friend. She took my phone from my hands and put it in her room upstairs. I asked for my phone back multiple times as I had bought it myself and paid for everything to do with it. She kept refusing and told her boyfriend to not give me my phone back. I sat at the top of the stairs and said, "I'm not moving till I get my phone back." She shoved me backwards and put her forearm on my throat with her whole weight behind it. My mother is not a light woman, weighing in at around 300 pounds at 5'2". I can still remember her whispering in my ear that she could kill me and get away with it. My vision started going black at the edges and I genuinely thought I was going to die. Pushing her off did not work and I was starting to lose consciousness, so I tried to punch her. It was a feeble slap against her side, but it was enough. She threw me down the stairs and said I was attacking her. She grabbed my throat with her nails and shoved me towards the living room. The next 2 hours were filled with her telling me how much she hated me and wished she had gotten an abortion. I was punched multiple times and told that I'd never be believed, that her boyfriend and his best mate would vouch for her and say I attacked her and she acted in self-defense. I cried myself to sleep and I'm shaking as I write this now. Choking someone is the most unforgivable of domestic violence and is a direct precursor to murder. Mass hysteria at Oxford Street on Black Friday. My friend and I were walking around Oxford Street in London on Black Friday and we jokingly said, "Hey, this would be the perfect place for a terrorist attack." There were thousands upon thousands of people pressed together in these busy streets. I swear, like 5 minutes later we hear this roar of thousands of people screaming all at once. The sound pulsed through our bodies as the mass of people around us suddenly started running. I grabbed my friend who was panicking and dragged us into a store to go hide behind a pillar. After like 30 seconds they locked the doors and people who still wanted to get in started slamming the windows. Inside the store people were crying and there even was a kid without a parent screaming. After a few minutes they said we could go out through the back. Heavily armed police forces yelled at us to run again and we went to an office building that was packed with people, again waiting for news. During all that, my parents were there too, but not with us. All my mother had given me was a text message saying, "Shots." I swear, thinking about how I felt that evening still gives me shivers. In those moments, you really believe there are people shooting at you. There's nothing louder than the collective screams of people around you. The event even has a Wikipedia page. Oxford Circus Panic. I was 17. Was coming home from my GF at the Times house around 3 or 4 in the AM. I live in an apartment and would regularly jump my backyard fence. Climb up to the second floor and come down the stairs to climb through my window on the first floor. I get to the fence. Hear a car screeching its tires. I get to the top of the fence and as I turn my back to land I hear footsteps running towards where I am. I'm caught off guard because no one should be back here at this time. I land and turn around to see who it is. It's a neighbor who lives in the building. A 32-year-old gangster cholo frequent drug user. I felt relief because we were on decent terms and he knew who I was growing up. But he has an Uzi in his hand. He half points it at me shaking as he does so. I nearly shit myself. But he lowers it realizing who I am as I say, "What's up?" He was obviously on drugs. Meth was his poison and I could tell by the way he was talking. He asked me to hold the gun so he can take a piss. Pushing it into my chest as he did so. I could feel him shaking from adrenaline drugs. I look and it's just cold hard steel in the shape of a gun. It looked like death. I felt like I didn't have a choice. I was stuck for a second, but I managed to take a step back, raise my hands and say, "Nah bro. I can't." He says it's all good. Use her shirt to hold it just real quick so he can piss. I repeat, "Nah. I can't." Put it on the floor. And do what you gotta do, I'll keep watch. He proceeds to take a piss. Turning my way every other second because his loaded gun is on the floor between us. I look the other way. Try not to make him any more nervous. Look into the sky and hear a helicopter approaching. It's low and its searchlight is scanning the area. I tell him, "Yo, I gotta go." He asks if I have keys to the backyard door. I nervously pull them out and say, "Yeah, I do." "Let's go though." I hurriedly run to the door. Open it for us. He lives on the first floor as well. And we go opposite ways. A huge relief. I have to jump through my window still. I can barely manage to get the screen off because I'm shaking so much. I manage to get in 10 seconds later and am shaking nervous from what just happened. I wash my face, change my clothes, get ready for bed, and smoke a few bowls of herb to calm down. I thought it was a good idea. So I put Adult Swim on and try to relax and drift to sleep. 20 minutes later. As I'm drifting off into sleep, a red laser is being pointed through my curtains. I nearly shit myself as my bed was visible and the dot seemed like it was shaky and searching. I was fucking terrified. My only thought was he went and got more high. Thought about what happened and decided I saw too much. I'm literally hugging my wall standing on my bed trying to avoid the laser beam. I thought I was dead. Then the light shuts off and flicks on and off a couple times. And I notice the angle isn't floor level. It's coming in from the second floor. The neighbor girl I used to talk to had 2 younger sisters and their window was across from mine, but on the second floor. They were shining a laser in my room. Most likely they saw me jumping into my room and decided it was a good fucking idea that night to shine a laser beam into my room. I was pissed and called her, sent her a few texts blowing up about them shining a laser into my room that late at night. She understood without me having to explain and they stopped immediately. But damn the thoughts that were running through my head. I didn't know whether to laugh or to cry about the situation. When I was 10, my school St. Anthony's in South Bend, Indiana had a fair which featured a ride called the Bullet. 2 people sit in a revolving barrel that's a small bullet-shaped cage, which revolves as you go around a circle like a Ferris wheel at average Ferris wheel height. Well, me and a 6-year-old are getting on, and the guy's loading us in and starts having us put on our belts. which I start to do, and as the kid is getting in the seat, the ride fires up accidentally. I can see in slow motion, the operator runs to turn it off, but it's too late. We shoot up to the top super fast at I'd say 30 to 40 miles per hour. Remember how I said it revolves? It turned so the door we came in was pointing straight down, and since it started suddenly, it was not latched shut. I was really lucky and had belted the top portion, so my chest and upper body were held my legs splayed out against a small cage above the door. Poor kid though hadn't had anything on, but I had grabbed him and he was doing same thing his legs holding onto the seat, the doors swinging open below us to I'd say about a 100-foot drop to concrete. Everyone starts screaming and gathering as the operator starts slowly climbing up to us and we're just hanging there as a huge crowd forms. I locked onto him for life and oddly enough never got tired holding his likely 60 pounds. I also remember being very calm about everything, just watching the crowd and the tree line and thinking how embarrassed I was for the attention. We said very little, I just asked if he was okay and he looked at me and nodded a pale face, and that was it. We just clung there, waiting for the operator for what felt like forever. I remember at one point someone yelling for us to switch places because he was so young, which was weird, but there was no way I was going to move or adjust my grip for fear of falling. Though it felt like forever, it was likely about 20 minutes for the guy to finally get to us and close the door. He told us to put on our belts best we could, climb down, started it up, and we got down and off. My parents were pretty absent, so of course weren't there to scream at the guy. I just remember being in a daze till my rents came and got me. I was leaving work late at night, around 2 or 3 a.m, for a half-hour drive back home. The town I was working in had lots of deer around. And as I was leaving town, there was a deer that was at the side of the road trying to decide whether or not it was going to go. I slowed down to well below the speed limit, 25-30 miles per hour, yerk. It looked like the deer was backing off, so I sped up slightly, up to 40 or 45, and then at the last split second, right as I crossed the deer's path, it jumps into the road. This motherfucker. I hit the brakes and lost control of the wheel. My car flipped halfway up and I was convinced at that moment I was about to have a very bad, possibly fatal accident. But it came back down and I was facing the opposite direction in the other lane. That anything had been just slightly different, stiff breeze, an oncoming truck. 2-lane road, a rancher farting in the wind. I would have probably been dead. If the car finished its roll, it would have been down a fairly steep grade off the side of the road. There would have been no way I would have walked away from that. Stupid fucking deer. That's actually the second scariest thing, but it's one I'm able to deal with. First scariest thing was the day we brought my newborn son home from the hospital. His body temperature dropped to a frightening level. He wasn't drinking his bottle, couldn't rouse him. We took him to the hospital in our town and they couldn't do anything for him. No pediatric unit. He had to be life-flighted into the next city over to a children's hospital. My in-laws came and picked my wife and I up, and that had to be the longest, most fear-inducing drive I've ever taken. We get him to the hospital, and they try to do a fucking spinal tap on him, and they couldn't do it. 2 attempts. We could tell he was crying from the pain, and it still breaks my heart. It still angers me and makes me feel like I let him down. The doctors were insistent they needed to do it and we agreed to it. And I'll never let myself down for that. After that, the only thing they did was give him fluids and put him under a heat lamp. And we waited. I didn't sleep at all that night. His temp came back up, he started eating again. To this day, we don't know what happened other than maybe the temperature in our house was too low, 75. It was late summer in Texas, but we turned the AC off for the rest of the year and still kept him bundled up. I was taking his temperature at least 4 or 5 times a day for his first 6 months. He was a little underweight when he was born, maybe a week or so early. But nothing terrible. Nowadays, kid is beating all of his milestones and, at one, looks like a 2.5-year-old in size. Tall kid, gaining good weight, can't fit in any of his clothes, lol. That fear, though. I've never felt a level of fear like that before. That was some dark, heavy shit that I can't describe. I've been through plenty of scary experiences, but the scariest one had to be that time a madman attacked us. Story time, as some context is required. In my mid-teens I ended up homeless with my family. Me, the oldest brother, my mom, my stepdad, and 4 other siblings. 2008 crisis hit us really hard. Well, we were on the first vacation we've ever had, no less. We got stranded in Spain, nearly died from contaminated water, struggled our way to France, and ended up there for 6 years getting by with food from Restaurant du Coeur, diving in supermarket dumpster, shoplifting food when we could, and dealing with shady people. No real choice there. So at one point we were living in these tents on the land in the Pyrenees that some bank in Germany owned and did nothing with. It used to be a rainbow site, so there was some mild infrastructure. And by that I mean there was a path and there was fresh spring water. The spring water is still the best. No bottled water can come close to drinking it directly from the source, no matter how fancy they say their spring water is. Anyway, problem is, we weren't the only ones there. Some 45-year-old French guy with a barely legal girlfriend stayed long after the rainbow had gone and built a yurt there. The only compliment I can give him is that he was pretty crafty. Built his own yurt, tended his own garden, made his own stove. But he truly was mad. He believed the mountain we resided on spoke to him in his dreams. It allegedly spoke to him and declared him king of the whole mountain. So he genuinely believed that everything that was there was owned by him and he could dictate what he wanted. And for some inexplicable reason, he wanted to dictate and ration the fresh spring water that we used. Limitless fresh spring water that flowed all year round, and we were only allowed to take from it twice per day. My mom has a spine tougher than she is and doesn't do well at all with unsanctioned authority bullying about. So despite that this guy was way stronger than she is, my mom basically told him to go fuck himself. However, the guy is also a coward. He waited till one day my stepdad was gone trying to make money doing black work to come to us and enforce his rule. My mom basically just raised her eyebrows at him and told him to go away. So the guy attacked her. There was a struggle. He overpowered my mom and started choking her. My oldest younger sister, who was in her early teens then, picked up the old hatchet we had for making firewood. I picked up a metal pipe with a bolt on the end. Not sure why we had that. Not sure what my oldest younger brother was doing anymore, probably because he was behind me. My youngest two siblings were crying and screaming in panic. But me and my sister didn't do anything. I think we both knew that we'd have to kill this man, and it froze us in place. And this man was bent over our mom and choking her right in front of our faces. Somehow my mom managed to struggle free and cut the man with something sharp. It was more like just a small bleeding scratch across his chest, but it got a really big reaction out of the guy. He seemed panicked and shouted, "My blood. My sacred blood." Not entirely sure what happened afterwards, but the guy did leave us. My mom was in pieces and couldn't really walk. To this day her voice is damaged and it's only gotten worse. She can barely speak now. It took 3 days for my stepdad to come back from further up north with some money. We had no way of communicating with him, so it was a major shock coming home and seeing the state everything was in. We had plans for that money, but it had to be spent on moving away from that guy, so those plans evaporated. But, well, yeah. That was my scariest experience. Probably the time I nearly died from Kawasaki disease. I vividly remember first coming down with it too. Apologies for the formatting or any spelling mistakes. It was Matt Smith's first full episode as the doctor. My best friend at the time was staying over. I couldn't concentrate on it due to feeling absolutely horrid, but I carried on as it was something I'd been waiting for ages. We watched the episode and went upstairs to bed. As we were getting ready I started to feel really weak and was incredibly itchy, like I couldn't stop, not for a second. I somehow managed to get some sleep, but woke up red raw and with a pinprick rash covering the entirety of my body. I still felt rubbish. We went for breakfast, but I had to come home early due to how ill I was feeling. Now at the time, I was living on a military base as my stepdad was in the Navy. The base didn't have a doctor's as such, but rather a medical center. It was run entirely by military medical staff. We booked an emergency appointment. I was seen by a lovely member of staff. She said it looked like I had scarlet fever, but wasn't too sure. She sent me home to await a second opinion. Several days passed, and we went back to the center as I was feeling worse. She looked me over again and immediately called me an ambulance. We had about 10 minutes to gather a few changes of clothes and toothbrushes. So me and my mum set off on a 3-hour journey to the nearest hospital. This sounds like a long-ass time, and it was really, but it was semi-understandable. See, this was in Cyprus, not the UK. So long journeys to the hospital were normal, not to mention it wasn't an ambulance, but rather a taxi, again a common thing. So we arrive, I get checked over and admitted to the children's ward. The nurses spoke very little English, so a lot of communication was done via hand gestures and, for lack of a better description, charades. I spent a few days here while we waited for a free appointment with a doctor. Of course, at this stage they were thinking it was scarlet fever still. When a doctor saw me, he said it was either scarlet fever of Kawasaki disease. To determine what it was, a few tests needed to be done. The determining one was a heart scan. They tested my heart rate, and it was maxing out the machine, 250 BPM. They scanned my heart and immediately sent me down to the ICU, where I was hooked up to several IVs, heart rate monitors and a heart machine. I forget the name, but I had pads stuck to my body. While this was all happening, my skin and blood felt like they were on fire, my heart is getting ready to jump out of my chest, and my doctor barely speaks. He spoke English very well, but he communicated more through actions than words, so instead of asking me to roll over, he'd just pick me up and roll me. I wasn't a skinny child, and I was about 5'6" at this stage, so he was a very strong doctor lol. The next day the doctor returns and says we're awaiting some special medicine from the US, immunoglobulin. Each bag costing around $40K. Thankfully, due to being a military family, we were covered by the NHS, but this made my mum's blood run cold. I ended up needing 10 bags of the stuff, so I can safely say, if we weren't covered by the NHS I wouldn't be here. Anyways, once it arrived, I began my treatment of chemo. And as I later found out, another day without this medicine and I'd be dead. Every 2 hours I had to have my blood pressure tested and my blood taken. The medicine was causing my skin to peel and my hair to fall out. My tongue was burned, giving me something called a strawberry tongue. My skin was still covered in a rash, and my blood felt like it was boiling. Eventually, I was sleeping through my tests. And was finally ignoring the several people who died around me and the man across the ward shouting for the nurses constantly. It had been about a week so far, and I hadn't eaten a single thing because of my tongue. I asked for some chicken soup. Here's where translation breaks down. The nurses brought me hot water with pasta in it. I tried some and it was quite literally that, hot pasta water. We explained chicken soup, they brought me the same thing, but with a full rotisserie chicken next to it. Any other time I'd have been thrilled to eat a full chicken to myself, but not this time. Our family liaison arrived during this time. We'll explain later on, who was actually Greek Cypriot, so spoke Greek. She managed to explain what I wanted. They brought me back blended chicken, honestly felt and tasted like wallpaper paste. I ate what I could as I felt like I'd already caused enough trouble. The next time, our family liaison brought us instant soup. After my course of medicine in the ICU I went back to the children's ward where I had the same tests done. This was about 1.5 weeks after my first admittance. I couldn't walk in this time, but as I was getting better, I eventually could at least put my feet on the floor as my skin was starting to grow back. I was still exhibiting all of the same symptoms though. Our liaison was our only visitor during all this time until my stepdad came. The reason we had a family liaison officer was because my mom and stepdad were in the process of divorce. The family's officer, different to the liaison, came to visit several times so we could make arrangements to leave our house and the country, as because my mom and I weren't military, we didn't belong on the base. They at least waited to evict us once I was discharged though. Anyways, I was getting better, still incredibly weak and frail though. I could walk finally, but was only allowed out of my room with a nurse escort. I was also still hooked up to a drip, so needed to take that with me. I managed to make it to the end of the hallway, a whole 10 feet, before I was exhausted. For the following week my days consisted of several of these 10-foot walks. So I was getting better. Eventually, they took me off my drip. I was managing to get down the stairs and eventually get outside the hospital into the smog-ridden city. I could make it to a local sandwich shop by now who made the best sandwiches you've ever tasted, though I don't know if this is because I'd lived off lasagna for the past week or so. Once I could make a predetermined journey unaided, I was ready to go home. The fateful morning came, I was going home, a family friend picked us up, who ended up speeding on the way home, subsequently getting pulled over, and I had to act ill again as the driver's story was that he was taking me to hospital. It worked. When we got back home, we were greeted to moldy food everywhere and a tip of a house. As, don't forget, we'd left in a massive hurry. I spent my last night in my house before we were evicted to a halfway house the next morning. I spent the final 2 weeks in Cyprus recovering, my best friend at my side. Once it was time to leave, I wasn't allowed to help with the furniture or anything, apart from not having the strength. Doctor's orders were that I wasn't allowed to lift anything heavier than a couple kilos. Me and my friend hugged and cried our eyes out, I waved goodbye, and we were on our way to the airport. I settled into our new home back in England. But wasn't allowed back to school for months due to my recovery. When I was allowed back to school, I was banned from sports or anything strenuous. This disease has affected my life in more ways than I can imagine. It'll always be a part of me, and I'll never shake it, but that's fine by me. It's a reminder of me winning and beating something that nearly killed me. Mine might be a tie of two very different scenarios. This first was a very large pit bull was untethered in its yard and decided to jump its fence and attack my wife, my dog and myself while we were walking. I had to literally wrestle this beast with my bare hands and physically choke it out. Thankfully it didn't get a chance to do much damage, my wife was knocked over and my dog ended up being fine, just very scared. This dog was easily 80 plus pounds and mine is barely 30. My wife got a scraped knee, and I got several scrapes on my hands, knees and legs and a bruise on my rear from the wrestling, but miraculously no bites. It still gives me chills thinking about what would have happened had I not decided to go with them that day. The second scenario, I actually thought I might die, and for a second thought my uncles both died. My dad, my grandpa, my 2 uncles and myself went on a fishing excursion to a northern area of Ontario, Canada. Very rugged trip. No modern amenities, and it took most of a day portaging by boat and canoe and packing into the bush to get to our remote campsite. Many miles from the closest town, which could barely be considered a town, just to give you an idea of the remoteness. We were camping and fishing a large lake, Lady Evelyn Lake, for a few days and landing walleye like crazy. After a few days of that, myself and my 2 uncles decided to hike a few miles through the bush to another lake known for bass. As we were at this remote base lake, a storm suddenly blew up and put us in a really bad spot, really quickly. We began to try and hike back to the main lake, where my dad and grandpa were, and as we were hiking the storm produced a small tornado that was basically right upon us. Debris flying, sideways rain, the freight train noise, the whole shebang. In the middle of this gale, a large pine tree fell right at the 3 of us. I literally had to dive out of the way of the trunk and was struck by branches which concussed me. I gathered my wits as best I could in the situation, and when I finally was able to free myself and turn back around, I for about 30 seconds thought this tree crushed my 2 uncles. Miraculously, it did not, though they too got caught under the branches, and my 1 uncle and myself were cut up pretty good, and I was concussed. We had to continue hiking back another couple miles through this storm, all the while worrying about my dad and grandpa, while still being very much in danger ourselves. My dad and grandpa ended up being fine, having found a cave to shelter in and wait the storm out. My uncles and I healed, and now 10 years later, we look back on that harrowing experience with fondness and pride. My wife and I are currently vacationing in Iceland. Tuesday morning we picked up a rental car and drove to our hotel near Vik, Iceland, stopping along the way at various tourist sites like the Seljalandsfoss and Skagafoss waterfalls, the Solheimagical Glacier, and finally the Reynisfarja beach, sometimes known as the Black Sand Beach or just the Black Beach. It's mostly fine gravel and not really sand. Last night Iceland received the final remnants of Hurricane Larry, which plowed across the US and the North Atlantic before arriving here, bringing high winds and lots of rain. The surf at the beach was impressive, and signs on the paths to the beach screamed for visitors to beware of sneaker waves. These waves can occasionally arrive much higher up the beach than expected and have been known to grab unsuspecting tourists off the beach to their deaths. I was not such a victim, though through my own stupidity, I came really close. Shortly after taking a photo, such a sneaker wave cascaded over me, almost knocking me off my feet and soaking me and everything on me. My clothes, my down jacket, my camera, my shoes. Within a second or two it was gone. I was extremely lucky in that I was high enough up the beach to not get the full force of the wave. I staggered a bit but was able to stay on my feet until the wave receded. I was also extremely stupid in thinking that I could pay attention and avoid the waves if necessary. Lesson learned. Luckily, we were close enough to our hotel for the night that we simply drove there and changed clothes. The hotel is doing our laundry tonight and, apart from the shoes, we should be good to go. And I'm hopeful that the shoes will dry out in a day or 2. When I was a boy, 12 years old give or take, I nearly drowned in corn. My best friend lived on a dairy farm. I hung out on that farm all the time. One fateful day, my friend, his brother, and I took on the task of assisting with the unloading of a dump truck full of kernel corn. The corn was meant to be dumped into an auger system that takes the corn into a grain dryer. I should preface this with the fact that even though my bestie and I were the same age, he was given unprecedented access to the farm's equipment. He was driving and operating the dump truck. There was no adult supervision. So, I'm sure you all have noticed the relatively small hatch on the rear end of a typical dump truck. The idea here was the truck is lined up with the auger built into the ground, then the small hatch is opened, and the truck bed is lifted to allow gravity to do its thing. In order to give gravity a hand, my buddy lifts the bed of the truck to max height and angle, then the 3 of us climbed up to the top, and we basically just walked in place to facilitate the flow of corn kernels. I am a little fuzzy on how exactly I lost my grip on the dump truck, but I did, and I was whooshed right down to the bottom of the truck. A wave of corn followed down and I was enveloped immediately. The pressure of the layer of corn on top of was frightening. But when my friend's brother decided to let go and slide down to try and dig me out, that is when frightening became more like intense fear. When brother got to the bottom, he brought with him another avalanche of kernels. At this point, I am trapped under a great deal of corn. My mouth, nose, and ears are full of corn, and the pressure I'm feeling over my entire contorted body was crushing. I felt the life being squeezed from me. I could not move, I could not breathe, I was actively being killed. Meanwhile, the truck is still emptying, and I am being drawn toward the hatch. I have never been more afraid before or since. Now, while Dum Dum was busy burying me, my dear friend had another idea. He jumped from the top of that fully extended dump truck to the ground and swiftly lowered the bed as swiftly as dump truck beds lower, that is. When he jumped, he sprained his ankle pretty badly, but that did not stop him from climbing back in and digging me out in the nick of time. The two of them reached me and dragged me to the surface, at which point I am gasping for air and choking on goddamn corn. This corn was not for human consumption, but I don't eat corn to this day, can't stand the stuff. I don't think I will ever be a diver either, as I suffer from crippling claustrophobia, as well as a direct result of that incident. I wish I could convey how it felt to be slowly crushed to death, to have the air squeezed from my lungs, but I can't think of adequate words. You can't call for help from the depths, the corn just fills your mouth. You know what, I'm done with this story. 6 days in a southern, backwoods mental hospital. All I remember from the first night was waking up in the back of a car with metal caging that separated the front from the back of the car. We were parked in an empty parking lot and the car was empty. When I tried the doors, they were locked with child lock, so I couldn't get out. The car was still running and I looked at the clock, it was 2 a.m. I remember thinking that I was being trafficked and then I passed out again. I don't remember how I got into the psych ward. I remember standing there at like 4 a.m. with nothing but the clothes I was wearing, my phone had been confiscated, and told I needed to shower. I didn't have a towel, a change of clothes, or shampoo and conditioner. I was still very out of it and could barely walk. They told me I had to shower and pushed me into a bathroom. I couldn't stand, so I ended up sitting on the floor and used hand soap to wash myself. Afterwards, because I had no towel, I had to put my clothes back on still soaking wet, and I combed through my hair with my fingers. Over the course of 6 days, I lost over 10 pounds. After I got out, I was told that they refused to tell my fiancé and my parents where they took for over 3 days and that I had been transported 3 hours away. They wouldn't tell me where I was either. They refused to discharge me, saying I needed to be monitored, despite me being compliant with treatment, attending the group therapy sessions. And by that, I mean we came together in a group format and did absolutely nothing or ridiculous things like draw faces that represented how we felt and shared with the group and saying absolutely nothing of concern. I watched over 30 movies over the course of 6 days, was denied personal therapy, told that if I wanted to be discharged, that I needed to identify root cause of my problems and solve it. As if I could just snap my fingers and all my problems would be solved, to stop being so entitled, to accept that I had irreparably hurt my loved ones and needed to accept that I deserved to be here and that I was resistant to treatment because I wouldn't just get better. I was on the same floor as some seriously mentally ill patients, including one older man who spontaneously got naked and got off on showing everyone his junk, another who thought God was talking to him and he needed to constantly and physically fight off demons that no one else could see, an older lady who probably had dementia and would constantly talk nonsense and fake seizures. As in talk 8+ hours a day even if she wasn't talking to someone, and a FTM transgender who constantly got enraged because staff refused to call him Frank and would steal girls' underwear. One time, I saw 6 staff members physically tackle him to the ground because he was belligerent and screaming racist obscenities and forcibly drug him until he was unconscious and carry him back to his room. These people obviously needed help, but I had only overdosed and was nowhere near this level of mentally ill handicap, and the type of help I needed was very different from the type of help they needed. They told me to get comfortable because I wasn't getting out anytime soon. If I hadn't had parents and a fiancé dedicated to getting me out, I would have been there a lot longer. They basically waged a war to get me out. I still have nightmares about that place. I've been in life-threatening situations multiple times. Had a cop draw his gun on me when I got pulled over. A bunch of stuff really. The one thing that was the scariest doesn't really sound that terrible, but it is something I think about way more. I'm a smaller white dude. 5'6" and maybe 120 pounds at the time. I was with my fiancé at the time. Now my wife, and she is an immigrant from Colombia. Easily recognizable as an interracial couple. Sometimes we would get people staring at us, but in my head I always thought it was because I have a big handlebar mustache. She was bald for a while. We lived in the San Francisco Bay Area, so I never really thought it was weird looks because of interracial relationships. We went to a small grocery store and this guy walked in behind us. I noticed just a bald white dude, mid-40s and bunch of shitty tattoos. This wasn't the nicest part of the Bay Area, but definitely not the worst, so I really didn't pay any mind to it. As we were shopping I noticed he was around us a lot. Started to make me feel weird, but not like we were in danger. We get into line to check out and he comes right behind us. He gets close enough to me that I swear I could feel his breath on my neck. I go to look at the candy bars and I notice he has 1488 tattooed on his knuckles. For those who don't know what that means. It's some neo-Nazi shit, and that's when it all clicks in my head. This dude doesn't like me, doesn't like my wife, the most of his tattoos are probably J-Link, and I am not safe whatsoever. I do my best to act like I didn't notice. I lean to my wife and tell her to walk out to the car. Get in and park right in front. She asked why. I said just fucking do it. I never give commands or anything like that, so she knew it was serious. I quickly paid and ran out to the car. I drove back roads and multiple turns I didn't need to take just to make sure he didn't somehow follow us home. I might have been totally safe the entire time, he may have been reformed and just as terrible with personal space, but I was not going to take that chance. It scares me the most because this is something that isn't really uncommon for people in a lot of areas, it was just something I never experienced before. Almost suffocated under a pile of people during a shootout at a nightclub. I don't remember if I was scared of the actual shooting, cause this shit happened pretty regularly at hip-hop parties in the 80s and early 90s growing up in Nick. Probably 18 or 19 YO at the time. I used to be one of those kids handing out party flyers everywhere so I could get into the club for free. You'd mark your name on the flyers, which also gave a discount price at the door, so that's how they knew how much you hustled, and I was going out 3 to 4 nights a week at this point. I'd say about once every month or two, I'd be in the vicinity of some gun violence at a nightclub. Didn't matter if it was a big venue or a hole in the wall, it usually went down something like this. Someone, or a crew, with a beef, would find a way to smuggle a piece inside, and then 1 or 2 shots would pop off, and everyone would start running for the exits. This time it was a tiny venue that maybe fit 80 to 100 people comfortably. It shared a wall. And a doorway in that wall, with another hole in the wall called sticky mics that would throw dancehall parties. I'd been to both venues often and knew the layout well. Anyway, not far into the evening, the first shots start popping off in the venue I was in. And I remember clearly it didn't stop after one pop, it was several, coming from different places. I'm pretty sure there were shots downstairs cause I was upstairs wondering how to get out. There was one set of stairs and a bathroom right next to those stairs. Apparently everyone around me decides the bathroom is the safest place to be, and I get shoved in by the crowd, but end up on the floor with someone's knee in my sternum. People keep piling on and I can't breathe anymore. Like I can't expand my chest 1 centimeter to take in oxygen. I do recall the shots getting closer and thinking I'm either going to suffocate or take one in the back through all these bodies, but also suffocate at the same time cause then nobody will be able to get off me. That's probably my number 1 fear when I think of all the ways one can die. Not being able to breathe is terrifying. Anyway, at some point, the shooting ceases and people start climbing off me enough where I can breathe again. I don't remember much beyond that point except finally making it outside and running with other people across the West Side Highway, which was right there, into oncoming traffic both ways and hiding behind the concrete barrier. I learned later the guns were smuggled in through sticky mics and the beef was between a crew from Lower East Side and a crew from Newark. I had casually dated a kid from the Les crew and at the time was dating one of the guys from Newark, but had no clue this was going to happen. IBF had taken a bullet in the thigh, but all he could talk about at the hospital was how the paramedics had thrown away his brand new kicks and cut his favorite pair of jeans. He claims he didn't participate in the shooting, but his friend, also in the hospital, was cuffed to his bed as soon as they knew he was stable. Did time in Rikers for his involvement. Last note. I lost a lot of friends and a boyfriend to gun violence during that time in my life. I'm pretty sure moving to California a few years later saved me from the same fate. This was before social media, so I lost touch with almost everyone and often wonder how many are still alive or not in prison. This week 10 years ago I was in a car accident with my brother. Huge lifted pickup truck smashing into a little Ford Focus. From my POV in the front passenger seat, the truck T-boned my side, but the pics of the car it looks more like a head-on collision. Witnesses say we spun about 4 to 5 times. Now I'm not super religious or anything, so this next part might be a bit controversial to some, but this is how I remember it. In that time of spinning I remember having a conversation with my grandfather that had passed a year before. He had told me he was there to guide me to the afterlife. I had just started high school and was finally happy for once, and I cried to him that I wasn't ready. He told me it was okay and that he'll be there waiting for me later. I had woken up soon after that. I'm guessing the car had stopped spinning for a moment. My brother was in the driver's seat screaming about his leg, there was airbag smoke everywhere, and my first thought was, "Where's my shoe lol?" His car was equipped to immediately call 911, so dispatch is on the other line introducing themselves. My brother can hardly speak, so I'm trying to tell the lady that we got into an accident. The driver's door ripped open, and it was a military member, I think, someone my brother knew even, that took over the conversation with dispatch. She said help was on the way and stayed on the line until first responders got there. While we're waiting, I'm in so much pain and thinking one or both of us isn't going to make it, so I'm professing my love to my brother, telling him he's been such a great person to grow up with, and he grabs my hand and tells me he loves me too. I hear dispatch start sniffling, and she's trying to tell us it's going to be okay. The MS shows up, they try to take him out of the car first and he's saying, No, get my sister first, I can get out and walk to the ambulance. At that point I guess his leg was feeling better until he actually tried to walk and saw bones were protruding out of his foot. So EMS is working on getting me out, our parents are showing up right as they're putting me on the stretcher. They're pulling a sheet up to keep me warm, and my mom starts screaming bloody murder because she's thinking that sheet is going to cover my face. I couldn't see her crumble, but I'm sure someone had to catch her. That is the single worst sound I've ever heard in my life. My mother thinking I'm dead. It makes me cry every time. I'm trying to call out to her, but honestly I don't remember seeing her until we got to the hospital. Funny part though was when an older couple tried to literally drive through the middle of everything, and I heard the cops telling them, "Do you not see what's going on here? You can't go through." All the while they're staring at me because I'm being wheeled right by them. I had to go back to the hospital later that day because I woke up from a nap blind and we had no idea what was going on. Doc didn't want to give me an MRI because he said too many can cause cancer with all that radiation, and my parents legit argued with him saying that I've never had one before, one now won't hurt. They'd rather have me be exposed to that minuscule amount of radiation than to not know if I had a brain bleed or something. 6 months earlier, I was hit by a car while I was in the crosswalk, they drove away. So 2 concussions almost back to back was real fun. In April my face and arm was all cut up, huge bruise on my leg with a concussion. September, I got a concussion, severe whiplash, bruises on my arm and chest, and a chipped hip bone. My brother had the open fracture in his foot, which broke again when he dropped his laptop on it a year later, whiplash and bruises. 2011 was not fun. I've had a lot of scary stuff happen since, heart complications thinking I'm about to drop dead alone in my apartment, all while my husband was in Afghanistan. The deployment in general was awful. And then my husband sustaining an injury last year that he shouldn't have woken up from and not being told anything about it. To say the least, I'm very thankful that my brother, husband, and I all have life. I try my best not to take it for granted. It's nothing compared to some of the posts here, but I was out walking my dog, Trudy, pretty late at about 11:30 or something like that, and she's a pretty well-behaved dog and extremely lovely. She is calm, rarely barks at dogs, and doesn't cause much trouble. Size-wise she's in between small and medium size for a dog, not small but certainly not big. There was a pretty big red flag that I shrugged off when a couple that were walking 2 big dogs were approached by 3 dogs off the leash, and it sounded like there was a bit of a scuffle, but the 2 big dogs barked at mine as well when I walked past, so I presumed it was they who were aggressive. The 3 dogs of the lead were pretty scary looking in their own right, all 3 big, one looked a bit like a pit bull, but mixed with other breeds. One had the fur of a husky, but was clearly not a husky as their face was nothing like one, and the other I didn't even get a good look at. They eventually started approaching me and my dog, and Trudy was a little cautious. She let out a subtle whine and moved to face the direction we came as though she was worried, but I wasn't too concerned as the 3 dogs seemed calm and were just slowly strutting towards us, so I stupidly told her it's okay and tried to continue our usual route for the walk, but then suddenly the 3 dogs broke into a sprint towards her. I instantly started running away with her, but the 3 dogs were way faster than both of us, so I only made it a short distance around a nearby corner before they were able to latch onto my dog. The 3 of them started to maul my dog, and one was even throwing her around like a dog would with a pillow. The whole time I didn't really know what to do, I just shouted at them to stop and cuss them out, as if that would do anything, and began shouting for help since I was right next to houses, but nobody came out. I couldn't let her die, but at the same time, if these dogs attacked me I'd be dead for sure as well. They were all massive and pretty scary dogs. In the end I just couldn't accept my dog dying. I loved her too much, so I ended up just grabbing the back of her collar and dragging her as hard as I could across the ground away from the scuffle before she was eventually able to flip back onto her front and run with me. They chased for a little bit, but I just ran as fast as I could up the hill and heading back home, dragging her since she couldn't keep up, and they eventually lost interest and ran away. I thought for sure that at that point, not only she would be dead, but I would be too. In the end her wounds weren't too serious. She is luckily a very fluffy dog, so we think that might have saved her life. There were a few deep bites across her body, and she ended up needing shaved, but within a few months she recovered and is now perfectly fine, though for the following months she suffered many nightmares, and she has never fully recovered mentally, as she went from being the easiest dog to walk to the point where now, if she finds anything slightly ominous she will just freeze and refuse to move or run home on walks. I was walking along a cliff on Ibiza far away from everybody else because I had enough of humans for a little while. I enjoyed the sea and the views, so I didn't watch my surroundings enough. I tripped over a stone and fell down the cliff 13 meters. 42-ish feet. After 4 meters I hit my head and ripped a big part of skin from my arms as I was trying to protect my head. It got cut open on different spots anyway, but I wouldn't have survived the sharp rocks otherwise. After another 4 meters I fell on my back quite heavily and ripped away part of the skin there as well. After the last 5 meters I landed on my left foot. 3 spiky stones washed spiky by the sea next to it pierced through my feet, leaving my metatarsal bones shattered in 50 pieces. I black out. When I woke back up there was blood all over the place and it felt like I bled everywhere. I knew I had to get up to survive. My cell phone was broken and my wallet with my passport and everything was gone. I dragged myself to the water. 1 to 2 meters, where I luckily found my wallet. I saw a cottage with stairs chiseled down to the sea about 400 meters, 1.300 feet, and I swam there. I don't know how I didn't black out again, because it was the worst pain I ever experienced. It felt like lying in liquid fire and getting burned alive. I made it to the stairs somehow and started dragging myself up. Still on the ground I knocked on the doors for a couple of minutes. I didn't have much of a sense of time during this part of the story, so I can't really tell how long I was doing something particularly. Nobody opened, so I dragged my way back through the forest I came from. At some point I lifted myself up a tree because I realized I'd bleed out on the way back to civilization at the current pace. My left foot was slubber so not much of use, but I still could use some parts of my heel, so I limped back to nearest street. The moment I entered the street I collapsed and blacked out again. Next thing I know is being in an ambulance with a big syringe in my chest. My heart wasn't working properly and my lung tried to collapse. They said I needed blood urgently and asked for my blood type. I had no idea. Meanwhile the other guy coked up the holes in my left foot. In the hospital I immediately got into op because I had ribs shoved into my lung and they needed to pull them back out. Because of my blood loss they didn't know how to anesthetize me properly, but my lungs started to collapse again, so they started operating anyway. I blacked out again. Next thing I know I am in my room looking like a mummy and feeling like absolute shit. Doctor comes and says I need to stay in. 2 weeks for checking. I said hell no, it's my 18th birthday tomorrow I leave. And I really left. Now years later I could spank my younger self for leaving the hospital because my body is really fucked up now and that's just because I was a young dumb fuck at that time. But yeah, I survived but I was really scared during that event. Mexico has a pretty big reputation of making civilians disappear, either by hands of narcos or the police. It doesn't make a difference, really. So one day I went to see Midsommar with a friend to a cinema. This theater was the only one that had the movie subtitled in my city that day. And was the only one we could reach by commuting since we were both students and I was already paying for both our tickets and popcorn. Screening was around 2100 hours. We got out of the theater around 23:20 and the metro closed at 0 o'clock. We were really tripped out cause the movie was great, but also really scary and anxiety inducing, so we started walking. The nearest station was about 1.5 kilometers away, so we were kinda in a hurry. 5 min into the walk it starts raining. We cut between streets in order to make use of the tree to cover ourselves from getting really wet. We are walking through a nice neighborhood. Every house looks like it's owned by a rich old person. All of them except for this 2-story apartment complex that has all doors open and all lights lit up. An old black Subaru is playing music really loud outside. It's not such a weird sight. We thought it was just a party, but it kinda stood out because we couldn't see many people around the complex, just like an empty party. Kept walking and talking, and about 2 blocks far from said complex the Subaru burst off the streets and it reaches us while slowing down. My friend and I just ignore them and keep walking since we thought maybe they were just drunk or something. Then the co-pilot asks us for our phones. We really didn't think about it, we both had really cheap phones and it was not worth risking anything for them, so we took them out and were about to hand them to him when he asks us to pull out our WhatsApp convos and show them to him. He asks who were the last people we talked to. We show him it was just our girlfriends and family. He asks us where we work and to show him IDs. We comply and say we are students and also show him unit IDs. The guy takes his arm and puts it out the window, resting it on the door. We notice a big ass tattoo of La Muerte, which is basically death itself, that image of the skeleton with a black tunic inside. Then guy smirks as he notices we are scared shitless and turns to the driver and asks him, "What do you think, Captain?" Shocked we let them go. The driver takes a look at us and says, "Be safe kids," and they burst out again. Man, I've never been more scared. I thought we were about to be killed or something. It's pretty common for cops to just take teenagers and plant them with drugs just to close a case or something. Most of them end up killed and in a hole in some part of the desert. So we had many reasons to be scared to death. Mind you, the driver looked like fucking George Clooney, but the co-pilot was the fucking visual representation of Amara Salvatrucha. This dude was really skinny, full of tattoos, and had a lot of weird marks in his face. Also had a look in his eyes that he had seen some shit. It could have been worse for sure, but we had never experienced anything similar. That's for sure the scariest thing I've ever experienced. I was on a flight from Fort Lauderdale to Atlanta. Our front desk manager told me it was the bad day to fly. Thanks for that. Anyway, we were cruising at 35k. The plane shimmied a bit, then dropped like a stone off a cliff. Everyone not buckled in hit the ceiling. We free fell for at least 10 seconds, felt like 30. Maybe it was. Everything was in slow motion. The plane caught lift, and I swore the wings would snap off. They didn't, but everyone that had hit the ceiling now became human shrapnel. Blood, screams, people yelling for help. Overhead cargo bins opened, shit flew out and hit everyone. The pilot came on, asked for a doctor, and said they were checking the plane for damage. There were several impromptu speeches from people in the cabin to remain calm, the most notable of which fainted. People, once they stopped yelling, started crying, fearful something worse would happen. The dude next to me, maybe you are on here, had ordered 2 stiff drinks as soon as he could in a pillow. Those drinks were dripping from the ceiling onto the pants of the guy in the middle 5 seats. This was a big plane, 777 I believe. I said, "What a waste of a good drink, maybe you could lick it off his tray table." Turns out I have really shitty humor when I'm terrified. Sorry for that, friend. I was just trying to make you feel better. Once the plane was okay and hurt people stabilized, we flew straight through downtown Atlanta with skyscrapers on our wingtips. Or so it seemed. They pulled off a lot of people on stretchers. Most of the flight attendants and several others were injured pretty badly, seemed like mostly neck from hitting the ceiling. I exited the plane and sitting off to the side in first class, I saw the pilot sobbing quietly. "I'm tearing up right now." Since then I've flown nearly 1,000,000 miles, over 100k a year. When the plane hits some turbulence even now, 15 years later, I pray and try to stay present in my body. PTSD is very real. My family and I were visiting a small city in Peru. This city is in a valley in the Andes, so, unlike Lima, it does rain a lot there. Torrential rain. Part of the city is in a slope as well. My brother was about 9 or 10 and had gone to a cyber cafe to play Counter-Strike. Back in the late 90s, he had been dropped off at the cafe, but for some reason we weren't picking him up and he was told directions back to where we were staying. Which was maybe like 5 or 6 blocks away. Still, he's 10 and at the time was very forgetful. Now, keep in mind that at this point in time we had no proper cell phones. They were shitty and had zero reception in the mountains. Only landlines. He was supposed to be back by like 3 p.m. He wasn't. 4 p.m. Still not back. Now we started to get worried, but we assumed he was still at the cafe, so we decide to go get him because we had to go to a restaurant soon. Then it starts to pour down. I had never seen a sky so black and so much thunder and rain in my life at that point. This was like flash flood type of rain. All of a sudden these sloped roads became raging rivers. We get to the cafe, and he's not there. We ask around other stores, and he's nowhere to be found. Rain is getting worse. We are driving in the direction he should have taken to go back to the hotel. Nothing. He is nowhere to be found. We drive around all over, we can't find him. At this point I am losing it. I am so sacred I want to throw up. I will never forget my dad's voice breaking as if he was about to cry. He's usually a stoic and not openly emotional, so that really stuck with me. They searched for hours and we couldn't find him until thankfully they called from the police department and told us they found him there. I was hysterical, crying non-stop. Everyone was crying, but my dad was searching endlessly. Nothing happened to him, thank God. He had walked the opposite direction of where he was supposed to go, and thankfully a cop found him wet from the rain and took him to the station. I think my brain always blocks this until I'm forced to remember. Thanks for watching. If you like the video, please drop a like, and to stay up to date with my latest videos, make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel by clicking the button under this video.